There is a specific, chilling instant when the person who has lived in your shadow realizes you can now see in the dark. Before we begin, if you are on a journey of reclaiming your inner clarity, subscribe to Wake and Win. We make content to strengthen your mental and emotional sovereignty. Your subscription fuels this mission. For the individual with a deep capacity to feel, this moment does not arrive with a scream, but with a quiet, internal click, a fundamental reordering of understanding. It is not marked by a final, explosive confrontation. It is felt first as a change in the atmospheric pressure between two souls. The dynamic, once familiar and predictable in its pain, suddenly operates under new, unseen laws. The empath has, often through 1,000 silent injuries, finally learned the dialect of the manipulator. For a long time, the empathetic soul moves through the world with a hidden, burdensome belief that care must be constantly demonstrated, that safety is bought with perfect attunement. They listen, they soothe, they decode unspoken moods with the precision of a translator. Their nervous system becomes a sensitive instrument, perpetually calibrated to the emotional frequency of another. Often without realizing it, they enter into a silent covenant written in the invisible ink of adaptation. The terms are brutal in their simplicity. I will hold what you discard. I will process what you refuse to feel. I will house the fragments of self you have exiled. This is not a flaw. It is a profound spiritual potential that has been captured and turned against its owner. For the empath, especially one forged in early environments of unpredictability, learned that hyper-vigilance was the key to survival. The gaze turns perpetually outward, watching the face of the other for signs of shifting weather. The core self, the place of wholeness, retreats into a sanctuary deep within, waiting behind the constant static of accommodation. Now, we must view the narcissistic pattern not as a casual insult, but as a specific psychic architecture. We speak not of everyday vanity, but of a consciousness organized around the protection of a fragile, hidden core from any exposure to genuine reality. This personality does not build a life, it constructs a gallery of reflections. Every person, every situation must mirror back a perfected, idealized image. Should anything dare to reflect something authentic, vulnerability, need, emptiness, that mirror must be discredited, shattered, or removed. This is the precise, tragic reason the narcissistic pattern is so magnetically drawn to the empathetic heart. Not because the empath is naive, but because the empath is radiant with perceptive depth and rich in compassionate commitment. The empath can be unconsciously molded into the perfect, living mirror. They can be trained to provide a ceaseless stream of validation. They become the devoted witness, the one who whispers, "You are not so broken," even as they are fractured by the very source they comfort. This creates a potent, dangerous alchemy. One feels momentarily freed from internal chaos. The other feels temporarily seen, essential, imbued with a sense of sacred purpose. The partnership becomes a silent, daily ritual. One offers a carefully curated image. The other offers their very soul as the canvas. But here is where the great unraveling, or the great awakening, truly begins. The moment the empath becomes fluent in the other's hidden language. And what, truly, is this language? It is not merely vocabulary. It is the concealed syntax of control, the distorted grammar of blame, the rhythmic pulse of confusion. It is the subtle, skillful engineering of another sense of reality. This language is the tongue of the unintegrated shadow, disguised as charisma. It is the art of planting doubt in your own mind while demanding absolute faith in theirs. It is love made conditional, with the conditions never spoken aloud. It is silence weaponized as punishment, affection deployed as a reward. It is blame that functions as a hypnotic suggestion, and charm that serves as a temporary anesthesia. Most crucially, it is the mechanism of projection. You become the living receptacle for everything they cannot bear to acknowledge within themselves. In the beginning, the empath speaks only the language of earnestness. They believe, with a heartbreaking faith, that transparency will be met with transparency. They trust that compassion can soften a hardened heart. They say, "Let us talk this through," and the manipulator hears, "Let me provide you with more material to twist." The empath says, "I feel hurt," and the other hears, "Here is a point of leverage." The empath seeks clarity, and the other sees an opportunity to deepen the fog. This is the source of the empath's profound exhaustion. Not because they are too sensitive, but because they are speaking a dialect of truth to a psyche fundamentally committed to a fiction. Then something begins to stir. It is often slow, built through the accumulation of 1,000 paper-cut injuries, through sleepless nights and a deep bodily tremor, through the soul's quiet, insistent refusal to keep participating in the untruth. The empath starts to see the patterns. They notice how every dialogue dissolves into the same mist, how every apology smuggles within it a hidden indictment, how every gift has a hook embedded within it. They see how their own beautiful, responsive nervous system has been turned into a cage. And at this threshold, the monumental psychological shift occurs. The empath learns the hidden language not to become cruel, but to become conscious. This is a massive stride on the path of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, as opposed to who you were conditioned to be. This is not a pleasant self-help slogan. It is a descent. It is a confrontation with every part of yourself you would rather not face: your justified rage, your unmet needs, your terror of abandonment, your secret hope to control love by making yourself utterly indispensable. The empath must eventually discover that their immense kindness can sometimes contain an unconscious strategy. If I am endlessly understanding, I will never be left. This is not a moral failure. It is a survival spell cast in the lonely chapel of childhood. Such spells must be broken for the soul to mature. When the empath learns the language, they begin to recognize the spell work. They stop feeding the illusion with their innocent participation. They can hear the hidden subtext humming beneath the spoken sentence. They can sense when warmth is being wielded as a tool. They detect the staging of a conflict, the performance of fragility, the manufacturing of a crisis, the strategic forgetfulness, the ever-shifting story. The empath begins to see the other not as a deity or a monster, but as a psyche imprisoned within a brittle, glittering fortress. And in that moment of clear seeing, power shifts, not in the outer world with drama, but in the archetypal realm. The manipulator panics, for the empath has ceased to be a mere reflective surface. They have become an observer. They have stopped being an open, absorbent field and have become a defined boundary. And boundaries are utterly terrifying to this pattern, not because they are aggressive, but because they imply a firm, unyielding reality. A boundary declares, there is an edge here. There is an end to me. There is a consequence. And consequence is the very thing this pattern has spent a lifetime evading through the meticulous cultivation of image. Your clarity is the true enemy of their false self. In the earlier stages, you were experienced as an extension of another's will, a territory they could influence. But when you learn the language, you become psychologically sovereign. You begin to sense the lever before it is pulled. You see the trap before your foot falls. You stop supplying the precise emotional reactions that fueled their sense of dominance. This is why they often escalate or destabilize when you awaken. You are no longer participating in the sacred ritual of their control. I want you to understand something of deep significance. They do not fear your anger half as much as they fear your unwavering clarity. Your anger can be turned against you. Your tears can be used. Your pleading can be exploited. Even your departure can be framed as proof of your instability. But clarity, quiet, steady, luminous clarity, requires no performance. It is simply the light of a conscious mind. And this pattern survives by controlling the lighting in every room they inhabit. Let us go deeper, for what we often call narcissism has roots in ancient, archetypal soil. In the old myth, the figure is not merely self-absorbed. He is enchanted by a reflection and cannot move beyond it to grasp something real. He perishes not from self-love, but from an incapacity for true connection. He is a prisoner of an image. This is the tragic core, so often missed. This pattern does not signify an abundance of self-regard, but a profound poverty of authentic self-contact. The inner world is often a hollow, fiercely guarded space. Image has been substituted for essence. Therefore, the empath's awakening is experienced as a mortal threat. If you see through the image, then what remains? This is why, when the empath learns their language, the other senses a kind of death approaching, not physical, but psychic. The death of the arrangement, the death of the game, the death of the illusion that the empath could be hypnotized forever. And because this psyche cannot grieve truth, as a healthy soul would, it often tries to annihilate what threatens it. You may be suddenly accused of being the manipulator. You may be told you have become cold, selfish, unrecognizable. Do not succumb to confusion here. Yes, you have changed. You have returned to yourself. You have withdrawn your life force from a false altar. In psychological work, we often see that the empath carries a specific archetype within the wounded healer, the one who can transmute pain into meaning. But if the healer remains unconscious, they degrade into the martyr, the one who sacrifices the self to prevent another from facing their own reality. This is not healing, it is a collusion with shadow. So the moment you learn the language, you begin something revolutionary. You cease offering your soul as collateral. You may notice a strange shift in your inner world, as if your dream life undergoes a metamorphosis. And dreams, remember, are urgent letters from the unconscious, written in symbolic code. You might dream of locked doors, of mazes, of houses with hidden chambers. You might dream of being chased, but then turning to face what pursues you. You might dream of speaking a tongue you never knew you possessed. This is no accident. When consciousness expands, the entire psyche reorganizes. The unconscious no longer needs to scream through symptoms. It begins to communicate through powerful imagery. One person once shared a dream with me. They stood in a grand theater, watching their own relationship play out on stage. Their partner was there, delivering a passionate monologue to a captivated audience, but the words were beautiful nonsense. The audience applauded. Then they looked down and saw they were holding the script. They realized they had been feeding the other their lines. In the dream, they stopped reading. The actor on stage froze, mouth agape, unable to continue. The audience grew restless, the lights flickered, and the stage itself began to crumble. Do you see? This is the dream of awakening. The empath holds the script because they have been unconsciously providing the energy, the dialogue, the emotional resonance that sustains the other's false self. When the empath stops, the performance cannot go on. The theater collapses because it was never built on the foundation of truth. It was built on participation. Now, I must be very careful here. Learning the language does not mean becoming like them. It does not mean adopting their methods. It means recognizing the blueprint, so you are no longer captive to it. There is a sacred difference between understanding a pattern and mimicking it. The empath learns in the way a doctor learns the symptoms of an illness, not to become ill, but to diagnose it and strengthen the host. And the host, in this case, is your own psyche. Your psyche has been infected by confusion, by the internalization of another's distortion. You began to doubt your own senses. You began to feel apologetic for your own existence. You began to mistake anxiety for love. When you learn their language, you reclaim the primordial power of naming what is happening. Naming is potent magic. In ancient traditions, to name a spirit is to break its spell. In psychological terms, to name a pattern is to drag it from the realm of unconscious compulsion into the domain of conscious choice. This is precisely why these dynamics depend so heavily on your wordlessness. They depend on your inability to articulate what you feel, on your hesitation, on your moral fear of seeming judgmental. They depend on an empathy that has not yet been trained in the art of the boundary. So what happens within them when they realize you have learned the language? First, their tactics often lose their subtlety. This is paradoxical but common. When a manipulator forfeits invisible influence, they frequently increase visible pressure. They may provoke to test if they can still extract an emotional reaction. They may intensify blame. They may attempt a grand, seductive gesture. They may alternate cruelty and sweetness with a disorienting speed, as if violently shifting temperatures will destabilize your nervous system once more. This is a desperate bid to regain the old hypnosis. Second, they may become peculiarly obsessed with your inner world. They will suddenly demand to know what you are thinking, with whom you are speaking, what you are planning. Why? Because you have become an unknown variable. And to this pattern, the unknown is dangerous. They need you to be legible, predictable, a territory they can navigate. When you become inwardly sovereign, they feel exiled from a land they believed they owned. Third, they may attempt a final, sweeping rewrite of history. This is among the darkest maneuvers. They will claim you were always the problem, that your memory is faulty, that your feelings are exaggerations, that you are unstable. This is not merely cruelty, it is psychic self-defense. If they can convince you that your awakening is itself a form of madness, they can preserve their illusion intact. But your awakening is not madness. It is sanity returning after a long intoxication. Let me speak to you directly now, as if you were here and I could see the weary wisdom in your eyes. If you are the empath in such a dynamic, you have likely tried to explain your way into being treated with dignity. You have likely over-communicated. You have likely performed emotional labor with the dedication of a saint. And yet, peace never came, because peace cannot be negotiated with a psyche that uses negotiation as a weapon. The great turning point is not when you finally win the argument. It is when you no longer feel the need to argue in order to trust what you see. That is what it means to learn their language. You cease seeking permission for your own perception. You stop bringing your truth to the court of their approval for validation. You realize the shocking, simple truth. The person who benefits most from your confusion is the least qualified person to clarify it. You stop asking a mirage to confirm the desert. This realization triggers an archetypal awakening. The empath begins to encounter their own shadow, not the shadow of the other, but their own. The empath often clings to the belief they are made only of light. They fear their own righteous anger. They fear the label of selfishness. They fear their own capacity to walk away. But what is repressed becomes fate. The empath who cannot access anger becomes trapped in endless endurance. The empath who cannot access healthy self-interest becomes depleted. The empath who cannot say no becomes prey. So the psyche, in its profound wisdom, begins to integrate the very energies it once denied. The empath discovers, I can say no without becoming cruel. I can leave without becoming heartless. I can stop feeding this dynamic without becoming bad. And the other senses this integration as the ultimate danger. For now you are not just empathetic, you are becoming whole. And wholeness cannot be controlled through shame. This, then, is the real terror for them. The empath is no longer participating in the archetype of the sacrificial lamb. The empath is stepping into the archetype of the awakened witness. And the witness is the beginning of justice, not social vengeance, but inner, psychic justice. The soul demands order. The soul demands truth. The soul demands that energy return to its rightful center, the self. The self is not the ego. The ego whispers, I want them to love me. The self declares, I want to be real. The ego insists, if I explain myself better, I will be understood. The self knows, if I remain true, I will be free. When the empath learns the language, they cease negotiating with the false self and begin, at last, to converse with their own self. And the manipulator cannot compete with the self. For their kingdom is illusion, and the self is reality. This is not merely psychological, it is spiritual in the deepest sense. The spiritual journey is not about becoming perpetually positive. It is about becoming whole. And wholeness demands that you stop offering your sacred sensitivity on the altar of another person's fragmentation. If you are still with me, understand this: their panic is not a sign you are becoming cruel, but that you are becoming conscious. And consciousness, once born, cannot be unborn. It may be resisted, delayed, betrayed, but it returns like dawn. The dawn does not argue with the night, it simply arrives. We now approach the most intimate, honest layer. When they realize you have learned their language, the first and most critical battlefield is not external. It is inside you. Their panic is just the outer weather. The true storm is the moment your own psyche withdraws its energy from the old, enchanted spell. That withdrawal feels first like guilt, then like fear, then like a profound loneliness, and finally, if you are brave enough to endure, a liberation so pure it is almost unbearable. For freedom is not merely relief. Freedom is an initiation. It demands you become responsible for your own soul, no longer using the other person as a theater where your unresolved wounds play out. You must understand this dynamic is not merely a relationship. It is a psychic ecosystem, a closed loop of unconscious exchange. One provides intensity, drama, a sense of fateful specialness. The other provides emotional labor, forgiveness, meaning-making, and endurance. Together, they co-create a small, sealed universe where objective reality is suspended and the nervous system is maintained in a state of constant, anxious arousal. This is why such bonds are so addictive, not because you are weak, but because a psyche starved of stable love mistakes intensity for aliveness. So the moment you learn the language, you begin to see the mechanics of the addiction. You see the emotional high comes from the relief that follows pain. You see tenderness is not given freely, but traded as currency for your compliance. You see conflict is not accidental, but engineered, because chaos keeps you reactive and reactivity keeps you controllable. This is why they often become most loving immediately after an act of cruelty. It is not love as you know it. It is reinforcement. It is the training of a nervous system. It is the creation of an invisible psychological leash. And when you start to perceive this with clarity, something in you grows quiet, a sacred quiet. Not numbness, but discernment. And this quiet is terrifying to them. They do not truly fear your words. They fear your silence when it is no longer the silence of pleading. They fear the silence that contains a final decision. For decision is the death of their influence. As long as you are negotiating, you are still in their world. As long as you are explaining, you are offering your psyche as a battleground. As long as you are striving to prove your innocence, you accept the jurisdiction of their false court. When you become quiet, truly quiet, they realize you have left the theater. You have stepped outside the game. You are beginning to speak another language entirely, the language of the self. Let's explore the deeper symbolism. For the empath, the other often represents a specific archetype: the devouring parent, the enchanted prince, the tyrant king, the trickster lover, the wounded god. The psyche selects a figure that fits an inner, mythic drama. Many empaths carry an unconscious longing to redeem the broken, to heal the wound in the other, to prove love can transform darkness. This longing is not foolish, it is mythic. It belongs to the archetype of the nurturing principle that seeks to bring soul into barren places. But when this archetype is hijacked by personal trauma, the empath becomes a priestess serving a false god. They worship the potential of the person, not the reality. They fall in love with a promise, not a pattern. They become loyal to a future that never arrives. And the other encourages this, for it grants them immense power. Your devotion to what they could be becomes their refuge from what they are. The moment you learn their language, you cease worshipping potential. You begin to worship truth, and truth is a ruthless deity. Truth does not negotiate, it simply reveals. This is when they experience what I call the collapse of enchantment. Their spell has always been a form of glamour, a fog that distorts perception. It makes you excuse what you would normally never excuse. It makes you betray your own body's alarm bells because you are intoxicated by the myth. When you learn the language, the glamour collapses. You begin to see their words not as divine poetry, but as strategy. Their tears not as vulnerability, but as timed performance. Their apologies not as remorse, but as tools. Their affection not as devotion, but as control. This does not mean they feel nothing. It means their feelings are not integrated into a coherent character. Their emotions are used, not fully lived. And what does the empath do then? At first, they try the old solution. If I explain that I now see the pattern, they will change. But consciousness does not work that way. When you reveal the pattern to someone profoundly invested in it, you do not liberate them, you threaten them. Threat produces escalation, so they respond in predictable stages: test, provoke, sweeten, withdraw, punish, charm, accuse. They may become suddenly spiritual, suddenly remorseful, suddenly romantic. They may even utter the exact phrases you've longed to hear for years. This is one of the cruelest phenomena. They often become most psychologically articulate precisely as you are leaving. This is not transformation, it is adaptation. It is mimicry. It is the trickster donning the robe of the sage. And if you have not learned the deeper language, you will be captured anew. For empaths are hypnotized by words. They believe the psyche is moved by insight. And yes, an integrated psyche is. But a fragmented psyche uses insight as a costume. So the empath must learn to watch behavior, not poetry, to observe patterns, not promises, to value consistency, not confession. Now, the dynamic of projection. When you begin to see clearly, they often accuse you of becoming what they actually are. You are the manipulator now. You have become cold. You are the narcissist. Do you see what's happening? They feel control slipping, feel the heat of rising shame. Because shame is unbearable, they eject it into you. They project it onto you, hoping you will carry it so they may remain pristine in their own eyes. Here is the key. The empath used to accept this projection due to their own disowned shadow, the fear of being selfish, cruel, or bad. So when the accusation comes, it strikes the ancient wound. Maybe I am the problem. When you learn their language, you begin to recognize projection for what it is, a psychic weapon. You stop internalizing it. You say inwardly, "This is not my truth." You begin the vital work of separation. You see, your accusation is your confession. And this is the moment they truly panic. For they require your self-doubt to maintain power. if you do not doubt yourself, their spells bounce off your psyche like arrows against stone. This is why learning the language is a nervous system achievement. It is embodied. It is the ability to remain centered while another strives to shake it. The empath must learn to stop over explaining, for explaining is often the very rope you hand them to bind you. Explanation offered in good faith becomes ammunition in dishonest hands. Thus, the empath's new language is not verbal, it is energetic, it is boundary, it is the quiet no. It is the refusal to react on cue, it is the refusal to plead. It is the refusal to perform innocence for someone who benefits from your guilt. Let us speak of the shadow. For here your transformation acquires a sacred dimension. They have been your shadow teacher, albeit in a brutal fashion. They force you to confront the parts of yourself you had abandoned: your anger, your self-protection, your sovereignty, your capacity to say, enough. Many empaths were trained from earliest youth to be pleasing, agreeable, forgiving, quiet, emotional servants in a system where love felt conditional. They associate boundaries with danger, selfhood with abandonment, no with punishment. Then this pattern arrives, feeling eerily like home because it replicates the precise emotional blueprint of your childhood, the unpredictability, the tension, the anxious waiting, the thrilling rush of winning back affection. This is trauma bonding. Deeper still, it is the psyche returning to a familiar script because it longs, unconsciously, to finish the story differently. The soul believes, in its hidden chambers, if I can finally make this person love me, I will heal the original wound. This is the profound tragedy. You are not only loving them, you are attempting to rescue your own inner child through them. And when you learn their language, you finally realize they are not the doorway to healing. They are the repetition of the wound. This is the moment the inner child awakens, not as helpless, but as furious. And this fury is holy. It is the life force reclaiming itself. It is the psyche declaring, enough. You may suddenly feel anger you never permitted yourself. You may feel a clarity that cuts. And you may think, this is not me. But it is you, the you who was buried beneath decades of adaptation. They will sense this. They will sense your anger not as a passing emotion, but as separation. Anger is the beginning of individuation because anger declares, I am separate from you. I have a boundary. I have a self. That is why anger was forbidden in your childhood, because anger creates individuality. So now you see why they panic. You are no longer psychologically merged. You are not an empathic ocean that absorbs everything. You are becoming a shore. You are becoming form. You are becoming structure. And structure is precisely what they lack internally. They have no inner structure, so they attempt to control external structure. They attempt to control you. You are no longer available to serve as their substitute nervous system. If you wish to know whether you have truly learned their language, observe what happens within you when they attempt to pull you back. In the past, their sadness would soften you instantly. Their charm would confuse you. Their rage would frighten you. Their silence would torture you. But now, something else transpires. You still feel, for you are empathic, but you do not lose yourself. You can witness the manipulation without being swallowed by it. You can feel compassion without surrender. You can perceive their pain without offering your body as the sacrifice. This is the dawn of spiritual adulthood, and it arrives with a grief that is rarely spoken of. For when you awaken, you do not only lose the person, you lose the fantasy. You lose the dream of being the one who finally healed them. You lose the story where love conquers all. You lose the identity of being endlessly patient. You lose the purpose that came from being needed. You lose the addiction to intensity. This grief can feel like a death. Many empaths confuse this grief with proof they should return. But grief is not a sign you are wrong. Grief is a sign you have broken the bond. Let me speak of the bond with greater precision. Trauma bonding is psychic entanglement. Your nervous system becomes wired to their approval. Your body becomes trained to equate anxiety with love. Your mind becomes obsessed with solving the puzzle of them. Why? Because the psyche despises unfinished stories. And they are an unfinished story wearing a human face, constantly almost there, almost loving, almost changing. This almost becomes your prison. When you learn their language, you see the almost as a mechanism. You see they survive by keeping you in the hallway, never letting you enter the room of true intimacy. You live there starving because the threshold feels like hope. Hope must mature into truth. Hope must become wisdom. Otherwise, hope becomes self-betrayal. Thus, your task now is not merely to leave. It is to reclaim the parts of self that were outsourced to the dynamic your confidence, your inner authority, your certainty, your right to exist without having to earn it. You must become your own witness, your own protector, your own home. This is why their panic is, in truth, a prophecy. It prophesies your awakening. It prophesies the end of the spell. It prophesies the tearing up of the unconscious contract. For the empath's awakening is not a mere breakup. It is a psychological revolution. And revolutions are never neat. They involve relapses, longing, nights when you miss the person who hurt you because you miss the intensity, the myth, the identity you had while trying to save them. Do not judge yourself for this. This is the nervous system detoxifying from a potent drug, intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable reward. The psyche becomes addicted to unpredictability because it learned in childhood that love arrived unpredictably. So it feels normal. It feels like fate. But fate is often merely repetition. Now, as your consciousness expands, you may have different dreams. Dreams of water growing still. Dreams of a house being cleansed. Dreams of a strange animal appearing, a wolf, a raven, a lioness. These are not random. They are symbols of your instinct returning. The empath often lives too high in the heart, too far from the belly. They are all compassion and no tooth. But the psyche requires tooth. It requires bite. The animal archetype arrives when the soul is reclaiming its primal truth. This is the turning point. You no longer fear your instinct. You begin to trust it more than their words. At that moment, they realize you have learned their language. You no longer worship their performance. You no longer kneel at the altar of their moods. You no longer sacrifice your reality to maintain their illusion. They will attempt one final time. They may become tender, cruel, spiritual, pitiful, heroic. They may express dramatic despair or offer profound, sounding confessions. They may proclaim, "You are my only one. I cannot live without you." And your heart will tremble, for your heart is real. But remember, your heart is not your only organ of truth. You also possess discernment. You possess instinct. You possess memory. And memory is sacred. It is the archive of reality. Do not let them burn your archive. You will know you are free when you can feel compassion without obedience. That is what terrifies them most of all. Compassion without obedience signifies the end of their empire. For their empire was built upon your self-abandonment. And now, slowly, surely, you cease abandoning yourself. You return to you. We now step into symbolic territory. When they realize you have learned their language, the relationship ceases to be merely personal. It becomes a psychic war between illusion and individuation. And the battlefield, again and again, is not the conversation or the messages. The battlefield is the place inside you where your soul once mistook suffering for loyalty. There is a secret reason this moment feels so electric. Your awakening threatens them not only because it removes their supply, not only because it exposes their tactics, but because it accomplishes something even more humiliating to the false self. It reveals they were never truly powerful. They were only influential over the parts of you that were unintegrated. They were strong only where you were still wounded. They ruled only the kingdom you had not yet reclaimed. When that kingdom returns to you, their power collapses like a dream upon waking, not with fireworks, but with a sudden, absolute absence of belief. This is why their response often becomes strangely theatrical. You may notice how suddenly everything is a performance. Even their suffering appears staged. Their apologies sound rehearsed. Their confessions feel delivered. For they sense the audience has changed. You are no longer watching with hungry, hopeful eyes. You are watching with discerning eyes. And discerning eyes are devastating to anyone who lives by performance alone. At this stage, they often introduce a new weapon: moral inversion. It is a refined trick of the shadow. They take the very qualities that once defined your empathy and twist them into evidence of your newfound cruelty. You used to care. You used to be kind. You used to understand what they truly mean is. You used to be accessible. You used to be manipulable. You used to deliver your inner world into my hands like a precious gift. They mourn not your love, but your availability. So they attempt to make your boundaries appear as violence. Your silence look like abandonment. Your self-respect seem like ego. Your clarity appear as coldness. And you must now pass a great test. Can you tolerate being misunderstood by someone who benefited profoundly from misunderstanding you? This is where many empaths collapse back into the old spell. They cannot bear being painted as the villain. They cannot bear others believing the false narrative. They cannot bear being perceived as bad. But this fear reveals the deepest wound of all, the wound of the good child. The good child is not simply polite. They are an individual whose experience of love depended on being harmless. They learned early that anger leads to punishment, that needs lead to rejection, that boundaries lead to withdrawal of affection. So they became agreeable, pleasing, emotionally skilled caretakers, servants of harmony. But harmony purchased at the cost of the self is not harmony. It is psychic slavery disguised as virtue. When they realize you have learned the language, they aim directly for this wound. They try to provoke you into proving you are still the good child, into explaining, justifying, apologizing, calming, rescuing. They desire your return to the role where you are morally superior but psychologically submissive. They love your goodness in the way a thief loves an unlocked door. So what must happen now? You must integrate a new archetype, the warrior. Do not misunderstand. The warrior is not the aggressor. The warrior is that part of the psyche which can protect what is sacred. The warrior declares, there is a line here. You may not enter. My inner world is not public property. My compassion is not a resource for you to mine. Many empaths fear this archetype, believing it will obliterate their tenderness. But tenderness without protection becomes martyrdom. Tenderness without protection becomes self-erasure. The warrior does not destroy the empath, it completes the empath. It creates wholeness. It creates the kind of love that is real precisely because it is not desperate. At this stage, they become exquisitely sensitive to your energy, like an animal sensing a shift in the forest. They may not admit it, but their unconscious detects you have changed. Your tone, your gaze, your willingness to engage in debate evaporates. Your emotional hooks become less accessible. You stop reacting to bait. You stop flinching at blame. You cease chasing their warmth. And because their entire system was constructed upon your chasing, they experience your stillness as a form of annihilation. This is where they often intensify the push-pull dynamic. They will provoke separation, then panic at its reality. They will push you away, then lure you back. They will accuse, then seduce. They will insult, then weep. You must see this with clarity. It is not confusion, it is strategy. It is a nervous system trap designed to keep you disoriented. In disorientation, you lose your compass. In disorientation, you seek external confirmation. In disorientation, you forget what you know. It is why they will often manufacture a crisis precisely when you are becoming calm. Calm is dangerous to them. Calm grants you the ability to remember. Let's go deeper into the psychology of language itself. The language. Here is the symbolic code by which you have communicated unconsciously for years. They speak in triggers, you spoke in repair. They speak in destabilization, you spoke in healing. They speak in distortion, you spoke in meaning. You were speaking different dialects of the unconscious. You believed that to be understood is to be safe. This is why you over-explained. You thought, if I can only reveal my heart with sufficient clarity, the other will soften. But what if the other is not softened by the sight of your heart, but empowered by it? What if your transparency is not received as intimacy, but utilized as leverage? Then learning their language means learning to stop surrendering your inner map. It means learning when not to speak. It means learning when to exit a conversation. It means learning when to withdraw your emotional energy so they cannot drink from it. This is where people become confused and ask, so must I become cold? Should I learn to manipulate in return? No. If you become like them, you remain within their world, trapped in the same psychic prison. The goal is not to become them. The goal is to become immune. Immunity is not coldness. Immunity is boundary. Immunity is the ability to remain yourself in the presence of distortion. Immunity is the capacity to hold your own reality without requiring another's agreement. This demands a frightening spiritual step, the willingness to lose their approval forever. For deep within, there still resides a child who yearns for them to finally say, "You were right. You were good. You were enough. I'm sorry." This child desires justice in the form of recognition, but they rarely grant true recognition. For recognition implies guilt, and guilt implies shame, and shame collapses the false self. So you must release the fantasy that closure will come from them. Closure comes from the self. And when closure comes from the self, they lose their final hook. We now enter a mystical portion, the confrontation with the shadow through symbol and dream. As you separate from this psychic system, your psyche begins to generate potent, strange images. You may feel as if awakening from a prolonged trance. Colors seem different. Music resonates newly. Silence feels deeper. Your body begins to speak. You may feel grief in your bones, nausea, surges of energy, waves of rage, involuntary trembling. The body is discharging what it could not while under constant psychological siege. This is not merely emotional, it is archetypal. What has been occurring is a form of psychological possession. Not supernatural, but real. The other has become a complex within you. Their voice lives in your head. Their criticism lives in your conscience. Their gaze lives in your nervous system. Even after you leave physically, you may still hear them. This is possession by the narcissistic complex. Learning their language means recognizing that inner voice as not yourself. This is why, in the beginning of freedom, you may feel a profound emptiness, because the complex leaves a vacuum when it loosens its grip. You were oriented around them, perpetually scanning, adjusting, anticipating. Your psyche was in orbit around their moods. When you cease orbiting, you feel dizzy. It is like stepping off a spinning machine. Your body feels the residual motion. This is withdrawal from relational addiction. This is the nervous system recalibrating to safety. And here, something essential must occur. You must endure the boredom of peace. This is remarkably difficult for an empath trained in chaos. Peace can feel unfamiliar, even suspicious. Your psyche may crave intensity. You may miss the drama, the highs, even the pain, for pain at least made you feel connected. But this is the deepest truth. You were not addicted to the person. You were addicted to the emotional rhythm that mirrored your childhood. And now the psyche must learn a new rhythm. Something else quietly shifts. Your relationship to hope. Guilt-driven hope is desperate. It hopes, if I give enough, endure enough, understand enough, things will finally become safe. This hope is exhausting because it is conditional. When guilt ends, this hope dissolves. In its place arises something less dramatic, but more stable trust. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in alignment. You begin to trust that when something feels profoundly wrong, it is. And when something feels quietly right, it does not need to be defended. This trust does not make life easier in a superficial sense. It often leads you away from familiar structures, yet it makes life simpler. Complexity born of contradiction fades. You no longer live divided between what you feel and what you permit yourself to do. This integration is the true relief you have been seeking all along. though it was once misnamed as peacekeeping, loyalty, or love. It is also here that many empaths confront a final illusion, that their suffering was uniquely redemptive. There is a subtle pride hidden in guilt, the belief that enduring more makes one deeper, wiser, more deserving. When guilt collapses, this pride collapses with it. What remains is a humility of a different order. Not the humility of self-denial, but the humility of recognizing that suffering is not a credential. It is simply a fact. Unnecessary suffering is not noble. From this place, forgiveness often arises naturally, without effort. Not forgiveness as an act of moral superiority, but forgiveness as release from fixation. You no longer need the past to have been different in order to live. This does not excuse harm. It simply acknowledges that carrying it forward no longer serves your becoming. You may also find your intuition sharpens. When emotional noise recedes, perception clarifies. You sense more quickly where energy flows and where it drains. You no longer need prolonged exposure to determine alignment. This efficiency is not impatience, it is attunement. The psyche has learned its own language. If we look at this transformation through the lens of the soul's long journey, we could say you have completed a necessary apprenticeship. You learned how to feel deeply, how to endure, how to understand the invisible currents between people. These skills were not wasted. They are now freed from bondage to guilt and can be used creatively, selectively, with discernment. What once enslaved you becomes a resource. Perhaps this is the most important realization of all. Nothing essential was lost when guilt stopped working. What was lost were the chains that convinced you your essence was dangerous, unless contained by suffering. What remains is a sensitivity that no longer requires self-punishment to justify its existence. So if you find yourself living more quietly now, with fewer explanations, fewer emergencies, fewer emotional negotiations, do not mistake this for withdrawal from life. It is a deeper entry into it. You are no longer living as a function. You are living as a presence. The psyche, having withdrawn its demand for guilt, has entrusted you with something more challenging and more dignified, the task of living truthfully without the constant reassurance that you are good. And this task, though it offers no applause, offers something rarer still, a life that does not require you to disappear in order to belong. We are nearing a natural conclusion. What remains is not an additional idea, but a final settling of the psyche into its new posture. When guilt no longer works, you do not become free in the way the ego imagines, with a sense of escape or triumph. Instead, there is acceptance. Acceptance that life cannot be lived without cost, but that the cost no longer needs to be paid through self-erasure. This acceptance is sober. It does not intoxicate. Yet it steadies the soul in a way excitement never could. At this point, you may notice your emotional range has matured. Joy becomes quieter, grief less catastrophic, anger more informative than explosive. Feelings arise and pass without demanding your entire identity. You are no longer your emotions. You are the one in whom they occur. This shift marks the difference between possession and relationship. The world continues. People still suffer. Injustice exists. Needs arise. The difference is you are no longer organized around correcting what was never yours to correct. You begin to understand that many struggles must be lived through rather than solved, and that interference born of guilt often delays the very growth it seeks to encourage. This understanding is painful because it contradicts the long-held identity of helper. Yet it is liberating because it restores dignity to both self and other. You may now recognize how guilt created a subtle hierarchy, you as the carrier, others as the carried. This arrangement, though seemingly compassionate, was not equal. When guilt ends, equality becomes possible. You meet others not as rescuer or refuge, but as fellow travelers, each responsible for their own inner work. Some will reject this equality, others will rise to meet it. You cannot control which. In this phase, the psyche often turns toward meaning rather than intensity. You are less interested in being moved and more interested in being aligned. The question shifts from what feels strongest to what feels true. Truth here is lived coherence. When your outer actions no longer contradict your inner knowing, a deep fatigue lifts. Not all tiredness disappears, but existential exhaustion fades. You no longer wake each day bracing against invisible demands. There is also a reconciliation with limitation. You recognize you cannot love everyone, help everyone, understand everyone. And this does not make you deficient. Limitation becomes a form of wisdom, not a moral failure. The psyche stops punishing itself for being human. This alone releases enormous energy. If guilt once functioned as a false center, what now holds the personality together is integrity. Integrity is not perfection. It is consistency between inner truth and outer life. It allows you to say yes when yes is real and no when no is necessary without elaborate justifications. Integrity simplifies. It strips away the excess movements that once defined your days. From this place, even suffering changes its meaning. Pain that arises from alignment feels different from pain that arises from self-betrayal. The former may still hurt deeply, but it does not corrode the soul. It does not produce the quiet shame that once accompanied endurance. You suffer, if you must, without disappearing. This is a profound shift, one often unnoticed by those who measure growth only by outward success. The empath who has crossed this threshold does not announce it. There is no need. The change is evident in what no longer happens: fewer explanations, fewer entanglements, fewer apologies for existing as you are. Life becomes less crowded, and in that spaciousness, something essential finally has room to breathe. I would not call this final state healing, for healing implies a return to what was, nor awakening, which suggests sudden illumination. I would call it arrival into oneself without drama, without demand, without the old inner tribunal convening at every turn. Guilt, once a necessary teacher, has completed its lesson. It withdraws quietly, like a figure leaving a room when its work is done. In its absence, there is no void, only the steady presence of a self that no longer needs to earn the right to exist. If you find yourself living now with less urgency, less noise, and less need to be understood, do not mistake this for withdrawal from the world. It is a sign you are finally standing in it, not as a function, not as a role, but as a whole human being capable of empathy, yet no longer governed by guilt, capable of love, yet no longer required to disappear in order to give it. That is where the turning point truly completes itself. Not in what you do next, but in how quietly, firmly, and truthfully you now stand where you are. If this exploration of reclaiming your inner truth resonated with you, please like this video. It tells the YouTube algorithm that this content matters and helps others find their way to wake and win. Your support lets us create more guides for your journey to sovereignty. Thank you for listening.